I guess before I turn to my colleagues, it seems, and we'll hear from the local and regional folks, most of these adaptation policies are being implemented at the local level. We've heard some of the things that we're doing here. Again, I guess the question on structure is does the state have enough ability to assist these local and regional efforts, or do you need more, I don't want to say legislation because that's what all we do is, but assistance?
Well, I would again say that one of the themes of this administration, we're all sick of the word subsidiarity, but we believe in the power of organic change at the local level, and we've done it in a variety of ways. Certainly the healthcare reform that we're implementing through the Affordable Care Act is a very ground up in California process with support. The support that is usually needed, and Dr. Rudolph talked about it, and everybody comes to you and to us and talks about financial resources. We can't do everything with the amount of resource that we have, so we do what we can with the amount of resource that we can, and that's another theme of this administration, is living within our means. So most of the requests that I get are for more resource, not for more authority. We have a lot of authority at the local level, and we're doing our Let's Get Healthy California Task Force. Is a very ground-up effort, and there are incredible innovations. The governor just appointed Karen Smith to be the new health director, public health director. She comes from Napa. Live Healthy Napa is an extraordinary program that we're modeling and working with. There are wonderful things that are going on at the local level, and we're trying to leverage that and empower that, and because that's where the real change happens, and that's where it lasts administration beyond administration, so that the voters elect another governor that shares our passion for addressing these problems. So my sense is that we're resource short, and certainly in my agency, we cannot meet the needs of the vulnerable populations, but we're doing what we can with the resources that we have.
And I was just going to add, because we were talking about sea level rise and adaptation, through the Ocean Protection Council, we made 14 grants to local governments to update their local coastal plans, in particular with an eye to sea level rise and adaptation. And the legislature, in appropriations, similarly the last 2 years, made appropriations for other local governments to update their local coastal plans, those that just hadn't done it in the required amount of time in a recent thing. And that is a framework, and it's a framework where the locals decide in the context of their local plans how to deal with it. And we, from the state level, from the budget appropriation that came from the legislature and from the monies that came through the Ocean Protection Council, are trying to assist the local governments in doing just that.
Senator Leno, you have a question.
More a brief comment before I have to get to my next hearing. This is very encouraging to see these silos dissembling. I'll take a dozen of the T-shirts.
And I know precisely where you're going to sell them.
The challenge, of course, as daunting as it is going to take this kind of coordination. And it also delivers the message that for those of us, many in this room who are working on the Senate's package of bills relative to climate change, much of it taken from the governor's State of the State address, that we need to look at all of you who are here today and really drill down to identify who your stakeholders are and all the work that you do to add them to a broadening coalition of those who could support that bill package, because there are going to be a lot of oppositional voices, to be certain. And what we're trying to do goes back to Dr. Rudolph's earlier comment that prevention has got to be our first step. And that's what Senator Pavley has been all about for the past 15 years. And what our SB 350 really is about, and making sure that we stop the bleeding before we get to the fact that we need to take care of all the changes that are before us. So thanks for your great efforts, and I know we'll be working together on all this.
Senator Pavley.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for putting this informational hearing together. Very timely and important, and look forward to working with you, Bob, there may be some route on statutory authority, because I'm getting to appreciate the fact that legislators change, governors change. We've been fortunate in California. We've had 3 governors in a row that have been on the same path, with agency work not being interrupted because of philosophical changes on priorities. And so maybe it won't always happen that way, so we have to keep that in mind. But I have to say, it's really refreshing being in California. We have yet to have, in the 15 years I've been around, any debate on whether climate change is real or not. We can actually talk about it, not only adaptation, but mitigation. And compared to our U.S. Senate, what a different discussion we are having. And I think we're dealing with, frankly, the real world and trying to address one of the most difficult and challenging global problems, but with the impacts very real for California. You've articulated very well the impacts, whether it's health impacts or sea level rise. And so thank you all for working together. I remember when the climate action team was formed, but I don't think perhaps we've all been paying attention to, or you haven't been sharing with us all that you're doing. I'll put the onus on you people. One observation and then one question. When we talk about working with local governments, I know we talk a lot about cities and counties, correct? I've been just intrigued about the role on some of the private sector. For example, last week in the Sacramento Bee, there was an article in the business section on what Kaiser is doing. They are fully engaged, not only in adaptation, because they realize the health-related risks and extreme heat events. They are equally engaged in mitigation, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Whether it's electric charging stations and solar everywhere, amazing. I think there's some opportunities with the private sector in doing this. I know it's a challenge with local governments when you're telling them to update their general plan and add new elements, or that's an interesting discussion to have. But my one question is, could any of you articulate sort of that perfect project that marries adaptation and emissions reductions that can be quantified as required for expenditure of auction revenues under AB 32 that we may be interested in? What could be some of those? Matt, you were talking about, we know because of AB 32 and fees and nexus and all those kinds of issues, the expenditure plan looks at reducing GHGs, right? Mitigating climate change. But there's those double win possibilities out there on adaptation. Could you talk about one or two of those, someone that you could quantify?
Right now. Well, we'll have to collect the data. I just want to use, I'm the only secretary that gets to talk about cow poop, and I just did it in the previous committee, and so I have to do it now. I'll just take dairy digester. We have the most dairy cows of any state, almost 2 million cows. And we have the smallest number of dairy digesters in the state, which has taken a process of working across federal and state government to look at the permit issues to make sure that as we deploy this technology more fully up and down the state, we're doing it without unintended consequences to air and water quality, which has its own set of regulations, bringing that together. With the deployment of this technology, we are reducing methane, which is a short-term climate pollutant.
A very potent one, too.
Yeah, and it's a very potent one. We can generate transportation fuels. I think that's the next chapter of dairy digester technology. We can generate electricity, which have their own sets of greenhouse gas reductions, but also adaptation. But it's the new phase of the technology and being able to signal to the end byproduct as we get the water out of this, the product that can become a soil amendment and the potential for building healthy soils, which then becomes an adaptation resiliency factor, I think it's more than a win-win. I think we have the possibilities of a technology like that addressing several huge immediate problems and creating win-win-win and maybe
So you're talking about investment in technology.
so it's investment in technology or understanding what we can do with signals that say this is a market, this is a place to bring what they're doing in other states that don't have the air and water quality issues that we've addressed in other ways under different sets of laws, to bring it all together and take it to the next level. And so being able to signal this is the time. This is the time with compost to say, with more composting going on in this state, here are markets and market signals to make it real and address other issues. So I think it's really thinking about that in that holistic, integrated kind of way. And I think that's been one of the benefits
And
of
with not
CAT.
jeopardizing air and water
It's-
quality
that's what-
issues.
And
that
that's
could be a
why
downside.
literally bringing people together, when we did Dairy Digester work, it was
That's a
mapping
good
it out.
example.
Okay?
I may ask if there's one other example out there, because I wanted to see how much you're thinking on the innovation side of this or not, or whether it's an avoidance kind of thing that will be hard to calculate. And so I think there's, with a lot of smart people thinking about the ability for adaptation and mitigation to work together, but if you're using auction revenues, it's going to be heavy on the mitigation.
Right.
Has to be.
Thank you. Oh, we have one final
And
question.
I apologize, I've been in and out. If you already spoke to this, please forgive me. But you know, all of this, I mean, is very important, and I agree, it's so wonderful we don't have to keep clawing over whether or not we're seeing climate change. And what isn't wonderful is that the fact is that we are seeing it. But that being said, and in trying to address this issue, you know, we talk about regionally making changes and what have you. I'm interested in how you would recommend we go about requiring cities and counties to include climate adaptation and resiliency strategies in their general plans coming up. I'm actually doing a bill that's going to direct them to do that. I'd like your thoughts on that conceptually, not on the bill, because I know you can't comment on bills, but conceptually. And then it was mentioned earlier, you know, we need money to do these things. Do you have any suggestions on where that money would come from? And again, just conceptually, how are we going to get cities and counties to really address this issue?
And let me just say very briefly, because we did talk about it while you were out of the
I'm
room.
so sorry.
And talked about the grants we are making both through the legislature and the Ocean Protection Council for updates to local general plans along the coast for the local coastal plans to use it as a framework for addressing sea level rise. So we'd be happy at more length
I
to
appreciate it.
talk to you.
It's good to know great minds think alike.
I would
Thank you very much.
Edward.
I would add one other piece that I think is really important when we talk about resources is it's money, it's also tools. And data and information is really important. And so I think the work the Fourth Assessment is looking to do to continue to provide CalAdapt. Some regions are able to do their own work. Los Angeles has done tremendous work to look at the impacts of climate change on their local scale. Most places don't have that ability, and I think the state has a really important role to play to provide that information to local governments. And something we're really trying to do in the general plan guidelines is make it at their fingertips, to make it as easy as possible to access it.
Edward, could you please let Senator Jackson's office know about the changes that are coming forward with the requirements and general plan, so that will be helpful for them.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much for coming in today, and thank you for the update on adaptation. So let's find out how well the state is working with regional and local governments in this area. Our next panel consists of the Local Government Commission Climate Change Program Director, Kif Schuer, and Larry Green is the Vice Chair of the Alliance of Regional Collaboratives for Climate Adaptation, ARCA. Yeah, where and how can the state help the regional governments? Thank you, gentlemen, and please proceed. Okay.
Here we go. I'll use that one. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I am Larry Green. I'm the Executive Director of the Sacramento Metropolitan Air Quality Management District, and I serve as the Chair of the Capital Region Climate Readiness Collaborative here in the Sacramento region. We're handing out some materials here, and we will also be providing some written comments later and some follow-up materials for this. It's a very important discussion. I'm representing 5 regional climate adaptation collaboratives in California who have joined together to form this overarching statewide organization you've heard about called ARCA, the Alliance for Regional Collaboratives for Climate Adaptation. Somehow those names always seem to end up being acronyms and names like that. I am the Vice Chair of ARCA. Chair is Krista Klein from the Los Angeles Collaborative. I'll describe our role in emerging climate adaptation discussion in California and how our regional collaboratives are interacting with local governments and agencies and state agencies, some of our successes to date and challenges moving forward. I've printed several slides and you'll see those. California has been tremendously successful in developing and executing a plan to respond to the challenge of global warming. State actions supporting climate mitigation include the AB 32 Scoping Plan, thank you, Senator Pavley, the Low Carbon Fuel Standard, Renewable Portfolio Standard. These efforts focus on cities, counties, industries, and technologies. Meanwhile, we are already experiencing early impacts of climate change. And while we continue mitigation efforts, we must also adapt to the changes already underway. Californians have been responding for many years to changes in fire seasons, sea level rise, and extended drought exacerbated by decreasing snowpacks, flooding risk in Sacramento, seasonal changes in precipitation and temperature affecting our agricultural production. And I would say that when we go out and talk about climate change, if we use an adaptation lens around those issues, that translates well in the community because that's what people are seeing happening out across the state. Addressing those issues require actions that consider the geographic footprint of each of those crises, not cities and counties, but watersheds, flood basins, forests, coastlines, and more. Providing a forum for those cross-jurisdictional, cross-sector discussions has been a key mission of ARCA and each of the regional collaboratives. Slides 1 and 2 outline some of the climate adaptation issues that we see facing our communities. The first question we were asked was, to what extent are ARCA and regional collaboratives working with local governments to plan for and implement climate adaptation and resiliency efforts in California? We currently have these 5 collaboratives, Los Angeles, San Diego Climate Collaborative, Capital Region, which I mentioned, the Bay Area Climate Group, and the Sierra Climate Adaptation Mitigation Partnership, Sierra Camp. It's quite interesting that Sierra Camp joined us, the other 4 collaboratives, in December as a formal member, and we think they bring a very unique perspective since it covers the Sierra. And we were happy to see them in Sacramento because while we have coastal cities looking at sea level rise, Sierra Camp is more like Sacramento and has issues like us, the rim fire being one example. These collaboratives cover 80% of California's population and include urban, rural, and the mountain area of the state. Slide 3 shows that footprint. All have strong local government memberships. LARC includes the cities of LA, Long Beach, and Santa Monica. The Bay Area has a 300-person network that includes many local communities. Sierra Camp has 3 seats on their steering committee for local government, and San Diego has 9 public agencies, including that 5 cities. So the cities, local governments are involved in our collaborative communication across the state. Some of our projects, LA Regional Framework for Climate Action, LARC received funds through the Strategic Growth Council Sustainable Communities Planning Grants, and this framework is a 3-year project and began in October 2013. Bay Area 9-county needs assessment. This was in the Bay Area. Included over 100 Bay Area climate initiatives in private, public, and nonprofit sectors. And we have in Sacramento our Resilient Business Initiative. We're working with Valley Vision to develop a regionally focused tool to assist medium and small businesses where they exist, tell them these are the kind of practicable steps you should be taking to respond to adaptation. And Sierra Camp has worked with the Climate Solutions University Model Forest Policy Program to work with their local community and up in the Sierra. The second question you asked was, what were the major challenges and successes to date for ARCA and regional collaboratives working to plan and implement adaptation projects? First of all, I would say that ARCA has provided a regionally focused response to key state documents such as Safeguarding California. Each collaborative has done a great job of engaging the public sector in their communities. We have developed a toolkit which will help other collaboratives around the state to be able to form, and that toolkit is on our website, arcacalifornia.org toolkit, and it's quite extensive and has a lot of links to it. And lastly, Civic Spark, which you've heard about already. Our collaboratives are working with Civic Spark directly in some cases, Sacramento, San Diego, and the Capital Region, and Bay Area and LA are working not directly, but also indirectly with them through their cities. So what are our challenges? You've talked about funding already. And I want to say a bit about that because we are very appreciative of the money we're getting through the Cap and Trade program, for example. It's coming to the communities, but it's coming to 12 agencies. And all those 12 agencies are developing their own particular rules and regulations and structure. So at a local level, figuring out how that fits into, for example, Franklin Boulevard, Stockton Boulevard, we had to actually put together our own effort to get our own people together, because I work with the Air Board, somebody else works with the Forestry, somebody else works with Emergency Response. We have our COG, SACOG Council of Governments. Each of them work with a state agency. But we weren't used to sitting down together and talking about how all those programs are going to come down as money comes from the state and really hits the ground in the Sacramento region. The same with adaptation. While we have all these funds coming through the adaptation area, how is that money hitting so that regional collaboratives can exist over time, both funding and implementation? And then engaging the private sector is critical for us. We had Kaiser at our meeting yesterday for our quarterly meeting. They talked about what they're doing. They talked about what they are doing regionally on adaptation and mitigation. But we need to greatly expand that connection with our local industries and businesses. The third question you asked was, how can we work with both state and local governments to aid in establishing climate adaptation and resiliency? The key point here I would like to make is we've already been working, particularly with OPR, and I want to acknowledge them. They are an ex officio member of ARCA, and they have been the key for us seeing and working and reviewing documents like Environmental Policies and Goals Report, Safeguarding California, and the State Research Plan. They've been our link in that area. We also were a major planner and worked on the California Adaptation Forum in August 2014. We participated in the first national forum, and we will be in St. Louis in a few months representing our regional collaborative perspective at the national forum that's going to be held there in May. You also ask us ways to improve this process, and we've outlined those in one of the handouts we have. I would say, as you heard already, much is already happening in California. And what we have there is our principles of adaptation. Two things, consistency at the state level and utilizing existing policy mechanisms are really critical. Where we can help it, we don't need to invent new things to do. And you'll see there's about 9 or 10 principles there. We thought those through very carefully, and that should be something that would guide the thinking for the committee and the legislators as you move forward. With that, I thank you for the opportunity to speak today and represent the regional perspective, and turn it over, unless you have questions, to Kif.
We'll have both of you testify. Mr. Scher?
Sure. Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon at this point, Chairman Wachowski. It's an honor to be here as the Climate Change Program Director for the Local Government Commission. We're applauding the committee's leadership in examining how we can effectively adapt to changing climate conditions. We thank you for asking us to share our perspective on what local governments are doing to tackle climate change and how the state can work effectively with them to address this challenge. As you may know, roughly 70% of California cities and counties have already adopted or are planning to adopt policies or programs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Last August, over 800 people attended the first California Adaptation Forum, of which the state was a partner, of which 23% were local and regional government representatives. This widespread engagement with mitigation and strong interest in adaptation gives us hope that local governments will be a major force for adaptation action throughout California and sets the stage for me to share a few examples of what local governments are doing. First, local governments are utilizing and leveraging existing funding and new financing approaches for projects that offer broad resiliency benefits. For example, the town of Windsor was the first to adopt a pay-as-you-save water conservation and energy efficiency upgrade program that provides residents with immediate savings on utility bills and requires no upfront cost or new debt. To date, they've saved over 6 million gallons and more than 72,000 kilowatt hours. San Francisco recently became the first U.S. city to adopt a guidance for incorporating sea level rise into the over $25 billion in projected capital planning decisions the city will make over the next decade. Placer County is looking at ways to improve forest management practices to protect air quality, human health, community stability, while also stimulating local economic development through biomass energy production and reduced wildfires. Second, we are seeing local governments look beyond traditional hard infrastructure practices towards green infrastructure solutions that provide risk reduction, optimize environmental benefits, and can even save money. Los Angeles has been using bonds and reallocated hard infrastructure funding to finance green infrastructure projects, leading to large-scale initiatives such as the Sun Valley Watershed Project that integrates flood control, stormwater protection, and water conservation efforts into one area. The Napa River, which has seen 22 serious floods since 1892, recognized that they had to do something more comprehensive. After two hard infrastructure approaches were rejected by voters, the community approved by a 2/3 majority a living river project. In addition to the environmental restoration and safety benefits, this project has generated almost $900 million in public and private investments between 1997 and 2010. Finally, local governments are using their regulatory authority to respond to risks and coordinate action. In 2012, the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, right here, adopted a comprehensive climate readiness strategy that treats long-term impacts as an enterprise risk, has a 4-year update cycle, and will be applied to all long-term planning activities. In response to the projected 4 to 5 degree warming that will drive extreme heat-related public health events in the city of Los Angeles, they recently approved an ordinance, I believe the first in the country, to require cool roofs on all new residential construction and re-roofs over 50%. Monterey Bay and San Diego County, among others, are both working to integrate climate change risks into their multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plans, allowing them to address both future risks and connect climate planning with hazard planning. It's important to note that many of these examples and many of the relevant projects to date are happening at the intersection of mitigation and adaptation. To Senator Pavley's point, this is where the resource has been so far. They've been leveraging existing funding or planning mechanisms, and it's been invaluable to progress. However, it does impose some limits on the breadth of activities that can go on because not everything is related to mitigation that has to do with adaptation. Stepping back a bit, I want to highlight a few themes of success we see among local governments. We see leadership. Local governments are stepping out in front on this issue, as they did with mitigation efforts over a decade ago, trying out innovative practices with the resources that they do have and the staff that they do have. We're seeing existing policy mechanisms, to Larry's point, be addressed to address adaptation concerns. And over a decade of mitigation action has really given local governments some staff and analytic resources to tackle adaptation, and they are pivoting towards that, but it only goes so far. Despite the many individual successes, significant challenges remain. Unlike mitigation planning, and this is a really key point, the magnitude of climate risks pose vast decision-making and risk analysis challenges beyond the scope of local governments to tackle alone. As of yet, we do not have any widely accepted and well-developed protocol similar to the Local Government Operations Protocol for Climate Action Planning and Mitigation Inventorying for adaptation. We don't have a body of field-tested solutions or any measures of defining and counting success so that we know where we're going. Despite the obviousness, it bears mentioning, local governments are woefully lacking in the fiscal resources they need to take on adaptation at the individual level. We're happy to report, per your question, that local governments are working with the state in some important ways. And to echo some of Larry's comments, OPR's efforts to act as a coordinating body for conversations and information through tools such as CalAdapt, their participation in the Adaptation Forum, their support of ARCA, and their participation and partnership in Civic Spark have been invaluable. We've also seen some really important dialogue and conversations with natural resources, particularly through the Adaptation Forum participation and through Safeguarding California. We also recognize that a number of other agencies actively participated in the Adaptation Forum, especially a third-day event we held in which we talked about near-term actions and strategies for ongoing conversation. Some agency programs are starting to work with specific projects and grants, and you heard about a number of these today. We wanted to call out that the recent inclusion of specific adaptation criteria in the Strategic Growth Council's Affordable Housing and Transportation Greenhouse Gas Reduction Program was a really positive example of how we can mainstream adaptation practices among local governments by conditioning existing state funding, not necessarily having to create new funding. As noted above, local governments are using state and federal policy mechanisms not specifically designed for adaptation, such as the hazard mitigation plans, general plans, climate action plans, as a means to take action. And I'll speak more to the possible ways to change those. Finally, we want to point to a specific example that could be a prototype for how state and local governments can work together in the future. Over the last couple of years, as you may know, the Bay Conservation and Development Commission has been operating a program called the Adapting to Rising Tides Project. Not only has ART provided a strong, holistic planning process designed to protect resources, public health, and community well-being, but ART has enabled each partner, state, local, and regional, to leverage its own expertise and insights in ways we feel result in stronger engagement and ownership by all, acknowledging that this is a stronger lift for all the parties, but the outcome was greater than I think they anticipated. In terms of improving state and local coordination and collaboration, a number of points are worth mentioning. As you've heard a number of times, the recently released Safeguarding California plan has addressed a wide range of state actions. We think there's already a set of 7 excellent action principles for state action. As good as these principles are, they do not explicitly respond to local needs. They don't provide a platform to integrate local governments into the process. In light of this and other preceding comments, we respectfully suggest the following. Local governments need up-to-date information and guidance on future scenarios. This is a data analysis and a task that is beyond any local government to conduct on their own. The state could provide an integrated toolbox for funding, techniques, templates, and research to strengthen partnerships with local governments and build a statewide engine for climate change innovation and implementation. We need better policy incentives for coordination so decisions at each level help to reduce the risk of climate change and increase resiliency. Templates and funding should be given to local governments to fully integrate adaptation into existing policy vehicles. And by that I mean we need to make changes to these vehicles, not necessarily just bootstrap the existing vehicles so that they can continue to figure it out on their own. The state can support and gather effective allies by creating an official forum to engage and give credibility to local and regional governments. For example, the state could consider setting up a climate risk and resiliency management council made up of local and state agency representatives to openly define a shared path forward. And finally, but most importantly, past and present state funding for climate mitigation work contributed to the rapid adoption of policies and programs across California that has gotten us to the point where we are on track to meet our ADB 32 goals. Similar state resources for planning and implementation are needed to catalyze adaptation efforts by aligning state investments, capital outlay, whether permits or grants, so they do support innovative, scalable local solutions and do not support projects that put California's people or resources at increased risk from future impacts. In conclusion, our responses to climate change at the local and the state level will be powerful forces in the coming years. We can protect our people, our environment, while we also grow a strong economic future, but only if we take action together starting today. Thank you for the opportunity to share our perspective, and we hope it was helpful to this important discussion.
No, incredibly helpful, and thanks both of you.